Now, former First Lady Michelle Obama is often spoken about as a future presidential candidate. The Democrats are so desperate for any popular figure to take over the party, but how popular is she? Michelle Obama has launched a new advice podcast, IMO, to much fanfare. It's a podcast co-hosted with her brother, Craig Robinson.
Speaking at leadership conferences, things you do as a coach, you realize that what we have, even in our lack of resources, in our household growing up.
Just scintillating stuff, folks. And the audience numbers, I've got to say, are not great. The latest edition on YouTube features Hollywood star Seth Rogen, but it's just got 6,500 views in 13 hours. Not even that, 6,400. Now, I don't want to brag about my lefties video, but the one from just last night's program is already sitting on 894,000 in 16 hours. Well over 1 million by now, but then again, lefties losing it is pretty awesome. Joining me now is journalist and author Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya, what did you make of Michelle Obama's latest project? Is it relatable? Is it likeable? Useful?
So I wrote a column about it for Unheard, and then somebody wrote to me in the comments, "Oh, you're the person who listened to the podcast." You're absolutely right that it does not seem to have found an audience. And the reason for that is because the same thing that ails the Democratic Party in general ails this podcast. It's for and by rich women. And it's so amazing that this has not seeped in, that the Democrats have such a problem with men and such a problem with the working class. And yet Michelle Obama's podcast, her guests are all other unbelievably wealthy people like her. And I mean, they just don't have the problems that the average American needs advice on, because these people are all gazillionaires. And what's amazing and really offensive about this to me, Rita, is that Michelle Obama grew up working class. She grew up in a Black working class household, and we know that Black Americans struggle to make it into the middle class. Even Black men who are born wealthy, more often than not, find their way into the lower classes and end up poor. This is absolutely devastating. And Michelle Obama and her brother Craig Robinson have the answers to how to solve this problem. They grew up working class and they are both millionaires. And yet, Rita, they are gatekeeping the secrets that so many Americans are desperate to hear. And instead, they sit around with their wealthy friends and talk about things like when to end a friendship. And I find that a little bit offensive.
Absolutely. And the Democrats have become, as one very astute judge said, a party for weak men and miserable women. And it does seem to be what's ruining the party right now and making it unelectable. And when it comes to Michelle Obama, do you see her as a future politician, perhaps even a presidential candidate? She's always spoken about in those terms, her popularity, her appeal to female voters, but I wonder whether all of that is wildly overstated.
I think it is. First of all, reportedly, she hates politics. And so I would be very surprised if she found her way into politics on a personal level. But also, Rita, she seems very consumed by grievance culture. Her speech at the DNC this year was really shocking. I mean, it was about the myth of the persistence of racism and how hard it is to be a person of color in America. She's worth $70 million. I mean, she's sort of the proof positive that this is sort of nonsense. And I feel that that is very out of touch with where most Americans are at. And I'm not just talking about white Americans. I think Black Americans are sort of sick of this message as well, which is why you saw a lot of movement towards the GOP. 25% of Black men voted for Donald Trump, and his approval ratings right now with Black Americans are very, very high. So I think she's quite out of step with where the nation is, although the Democratic Party, again, does not seem to have realized that.
Now, Batya, you were on Bill Maher's program and your clips went viral very quickly, millions and millions of views. And I've got to say, you managed to make Bill look a little bit silly on his own program.
We're approaching 2 months in. I mean, you must have a feeling in your gut, look me in the eye and tell me you don't, that this is really going badly and I shouldn't have thrown my lot in with this team.
Oh, no, I feel the opposite.
All right. Tell me why.
I'm so sorry, Bill.
No, tell me why.
No, I feel so proud of, I mean, I was never a Republican or a conservative. I was a leftist, and I am still a leftist. I'm just a MAGA leftist now because...
That makes no sense.
Batya, tell me how you are, why you're so happy with how things are going, and explain to my audience, what is a MAGA leftist?
I'm happy because I feel like Donald Trump wakes up every morning and thinks, how can I make America better? How can I keep a campaign promise that I made? How can I do exactly what I promised my supporters I was going to do? We've never, ever, ever seen efficiency like this. We've never, ever, ever seen a president who truly wants to deliver exactly what he promised to his supporters and to the country overall. Trump throughout the campaign was saying our success will be our retribution. And that's what we're experiencing right now. This is everything I hoped for and more. And I could not have believed that he would be so successful. So, you know, there was so much that I wanted to answer, Bill. I knew that I only had a few minutes. A MAGA lefty is somebody who has realized that the MAGA tent is big and that this president wants to represent all Americans. At a more fundamental level, Donald Trump is anti-war, he's pro-worker, he believes in a protectionist economy, and he's a social moderate. This was the left's agenda for 100 years. And so I don't see why I shouldn't get to still call myself a lefty just because Donald Trump lifted the best parts of the Democrats' agenda out from under them. They abandoned labor, and he decided to represent labor. They embraced war, and he decided to steal their anti-war platform. They went totally kooky crazy on the lefty stuff, and he said, well, you know what? Looks like the moderate middle is just there for the taking. I'm going to take it. That's where I'm at, and I feel very represented and very happy.
And if more people just looked at the policies and the policy outcomes, the objectives of those policies, they would also identify as you do. But so many are transfixed by Trump and hating Trump that they don't actually look at what the agenda is. And you're right, he has taken a lot of what were traditionally leftist policies, and that is part of Make America Great Again, all about America first. It's all about protecting American workers, starting up American manufacturing again and reinvigorating that. And it's got to say, how divorced from reality are these lefties, even sensible ones like Bill Maher, who think Trump voters are somehow upset by what they're seeing. The polls are showing something entirely different to that. And even the polls that are traditionally favouring the Democrats are showing their approval rating under 30%. But yeah, I mean, this is just dire straits for the Democrats to have an approval rating in the 20s. How are they going to come back from that?
It's truly amazing. If you think of this split screen, on the one hand, you have a president who is representing the working class, elevating every hardworking American. He's getting us out of wars and bringing peace. And he's bringing common sense, moderate social policy back to the table. And what do the Democrats represent? Well, they represent keeping Tren de Agua here in America. They represent opposition to deporting rapists who are not citizens. They represent opposition to deporting Hamas supporters who are not citizens. They represent supporting trans women in women's locker rooms and women's sports. And they represent protecting the fraud and abuse of our government. So, you know, of course, their brand is in the toilet. Trump took everything that was good about them, and instead of saying, oh, wow, a president who's actually going to do leftist things, they decided to embrace everything that is just insane and crazy. And here's the thing, Rita, they turned on their own values and their own voters rather than admit that Donald Trump had a point. And this is truly unforgivable stuff.
Absolutely, and they're being punished for it. Now let's speak quickly about the Russian-Ukraine war. Earlier today, Presidents Trump and Zelensky had an hour-long phone call, and afterwards Zelensky said he thinks lasting peace is achievable this year, and he was full of praise for President Donald Trump. What a difference a couple of weeks makes, Batya. Tell me about how that is being perceived in the US.
I think people feel relieved. President Trump had to speak harshly to Zelensky when he was in the Oval Office. Most Americans approved of what they saw there. We want this war to end. We're finished, supporting foreign wars that have nothing to do with us. We hate the bloodshed. And I think a lot of us feel that we hate that our support was a big function of prolonging this bloodshed. I think President Trump feels that this is a proxy war in which the two superpowers do not want to be at war anymore. And he's desperate to bring this to a close. And I think he's doing a really good job. He has figured out how to play Putin, and he's figured out how to move Zelensky. And so I think that hopefully, please God, we will see movement very, very soon. I think he is very good at manipulating both Putin and our European allies. I think, we've seen European allies coming into the Oval Office and being very deferential. And as an American, you just love to see it. So I'm really hopeful that with God's help, we'll see an end to this very soon.
And he's been very good in getting the Europeans to spend more on their own defence and to start doing some of the heavy lifting, which has been another objective. Before you go, I want to play you just a small part of a speech J.D. Vance gave. He gave a masterclass on the failures of globalization and how in the end it hurts advanced economies.
There were two conceits that our leadership class had when it came to globalization. The first is assuming that we can separate the making of things from the design of things. The idea of globalization was that rich countries would move further up the value chain while the poor countries made the simpler things. Whether we were offshoring factories to cheap labor economies or importing cheap labor through our immigration system, cheap labor became the drug of Western economies. And I'd say that if you look in nearly every country from Canada to the UK that imported large amounts of cheap labor, you've seen productivity stagnate.
And the failures of globalisation are so much behind the Trump phenomenon. And that's, again, something people fail to understand, that people who worked manufacturing jobs used to make decent money, used to be able to provide for their family, have economic security. And we've seen that destroyed in so many Western nations, and it's been deliberate, Batya.
Absolutely. JD's speech is incredible, very much worth watching in full. He really makes a compelling argument there that the cost that we paid for shipping all of these good jobs overseas and then importing a serf caste in here to do the jobs that remained, working class jobs that remained, that the cost to that was not just the dispossession of the American working class. It was also a cost in terms of innovation and in terms of productivity, in terms of what Americans would have innovated if they were still doing these jobs. And that is truly, truly criminal. The disinheritance of America's working class while the elites got rich off of cheap labor. It is the root of the Trump phenomenon. For working class people, immigration and the economy are two sides of the same coin. And this is something that's very hard for elites to understand. And JD laid it out beautifully.
He really is quite exceptional, I've got to say. I was a bit surprised when Donald Trump selected him, but if he's not the 48th president of the United States, I'm going to shave my head live on this show. Batya Ungar-Sargon, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Rita. God bless.